Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of What's Going On, and I'm your host, Tom D'Ambra. As always, we are very thankful that you take the time from your busy day to join us. Today, we have a little bit of a request that took us from a viewer in Jerry, and we're very thankful that you're watching and that you have the interest to find out exactly what happened to our nation. And I know you've been fascinated by the information that we presented to you. And I'm very happy to say that it excites me that you went on and did some more research beyond what we have the availability of time to cover. He did ask folks that we would get into a little bit of the particulars of the bankruptcy of our nation. And what I said to him, because he used the word nation, and what I said to him was that basically it wasn't the bankruptcy of our nation. It was the bankruptcy of one corporation to another. And that corporation that went bankrupt is the corporation that you know is the government that's named the United States of America. The nation is the people of a political demographic. Okay, so I want you to understand, folks, there's a distinct difference between the nation, that's you and I. What went bankrupt in 1933 was a corporation that you know as the United States government. And that corporation went insolvent to a now parent superior corporation that you know as the Federal Reserve banking system. Okay? Now we've gotten into quite heavily that the Federal Reserve is a private foreign bank. And we're going to continue with that, but to understand the bankruptcy, it's very important that you understand the two entities that we're discussing here. So when they say, oh, our nation is bankrupt, it is not our nation, okay? It's not you and I in the sense of we weren't the corporate leaders. We have yet to determine whether we're part of that corporation through contracts and through laws that were made that we've never disputed, which may be the case, and we're going to deeply dig into that. But it's important, again, that you understand that these are two corporations, folks, okay? And yes, we're caught in the middle of it because we've been put up as sureties, and we're going to get into all that. But I just want you to make sure we understand that. And before we get on that, there was a couple, when I was researching some law for this presentation today, there was a couple of quotes that I made note of. I thought they were fantastic. And one of them was a quote on sovereigns by President Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, in Norfolk, Virginia, in April 26th of 1907. And listen to his words. I found it really interesting. We are of this mighty Western Republic. Oh my God, he didn't say a democracy. We are of this mighty Western Republic, have to grapple with the dangers that spring from popular self-government tried on a scale incomparably vaster than ever before in the history of mankind, and from an abounding material prosperity greater also than anything which the world has hitherto seen. As regards the first set of dangers, it behooves us to remember that men can never be escaped from being governed. Either they must govern themselves or they must submit to being governed by others. If from lawlessness or fricklessness, from folly or self-indulgence, they refuse to govern themselves, then most assuredly in the end they will have to be governed from the outside. They can prevent the need of government from without only by showing the processes the power of government from within. That's you and I, folks. A sovereign cannot make the excuses for his failures. A sovereign must accept the responsibility for the exercise of power that inheres in him, and where, as is true in our republic, the people are sovereign, then the people must show a sober understanding and a sane and steadfast purpose if they are to preserve the orderly liberty upon which, as a foundation, every republic must rest. Folks, what he's saying so eloquently to us is that our government, as we end this show, is our responsibility. This great experiment, as it was called by some of the founding fathers and down the line from there, the experiment, folks, is us. Are we courageous enough? Are we active enough? Because it is our responsibility as to what goes on with this government, this corporation, okay? Now, the United States government was not always a corporation, as we've demonstrated to you before, and we're going to get into that a little deeply. But I was also, there was another quote in here that caught my attention. And I know a lot of you haven't heard of this gentleman. His name was John Maynard Keynes. You may have heard of the Keynesian economic system, which is what we're under right now. But this was from it says a side note to him, John Maynard Keynes, member of the Order of the Illuminati, the economic consequences of peace in 1919. Now think of the time period here, folks. This is the year that World War I ended, and the economic consequences of peace. Isn't that interesting? Okay, here is his quote. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a free society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic laws on the side of destruction, and it does it in a manner which no one in a million is able to diagnose. Pretty strong words here. There is no suppler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of a free society than to debauch the currency. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic laws on the side of destruction, and it does it in a manner which no one in a million is able to diagnose. Isn't that an interesting statement from the father, if you would, of the economic system that the masters-to-be are currently providing for us? So the means here, folks, is all deception, as we've talked about before. And obviously, the linchpin, the loose, if you would, is the money system. And it's like Amschel Rothschild said, give me control of a nation's currency, I care not who makes its laws. And he doesn't. Why should he? If he controls the issuance of the currency, he controls all the economic and governmental, private and public entities of your life. It's really that simple. Another quote I found interesting from Abraham Lincoln: "To sin by silence when they should protest makes cowards of men." Found that very interesting because one of the things that I've come to the conclusion with about Americans is that not only are they very apathetic and very ignorant, but a lot of us, not them as you're a foreign entity, but a lot of us, we don't have the courage to stand up to these multiple foreign agencies that are ruining our country. They are ruining our nation, our political demographic of people that we call Americans. Okay? So what we have to find out, exactly how this all went about. And I know if those of you who have watched the show before have seen some of this information, and some of it you haven't. So please hang on with us. But first of all, we have to find out, folks, what actually is a corporation. Okay? So with that, we're going to turn to a couple of law references. One of them is Black's Fourth Dictionary. And we're going to get into what a corporation is. Now, listen to the language here, okay? An is corporation, Black's Law Dictionary, page 40, 4th edition, page 409, okay? Corporation. An artificial person or legal entity created by or under the authority of the laws of a state or a nation, composed in some rare instances of a single person with his successors being the incumbents of a particular office, but ordinarily consisting of an association of numerous individuals who subsist as a body politic under a special denomination, which is regarded in law as having a personality and existence distinct from that of its several members, okay? And also which is vested in the same by the capacity of continuous succession with authority. So in other words, what it is, folks, is it's a legal entity, number one. But what do they mean by artificial person, okay? We're going to get into that a little bit, but let's look at right here what they say about corporate name. When a corporation is erected, a name is always given to it, or supposed name to be actually given, which is attached to it by implication. Okay, and by that name alone, it must sue or be sued and do all legal acts, though it a very minute variation there is not material, and the name is capable of being changed by competent authority without affecting the identity or the capacity of the corporation. Very interesting, and this is what we get into with corporations when you follow like British Petroleum, for instance. When you follow British Petroleum, when they first started, they were the Anglo-American Oil Company. Okay, and then they, as different things progressed, they changed their name to the point where now they're British Petroleum, but the name invariance has no effect on their capacities. All right, what it does, again, is part of the deception part of it. So this is what a corporation is. It's a legal entity. It's an artificial person, and what we find let's reference another point with corporation. And this is what we're going to get into here, folks. From 1776 to 1789, the United States was a confederation. After 1789, it was a federal nation. Okay? And we broke down the word nation, meaning political demographic of people. Okay? Now that was excerpted from a definition of federal in Standard Dictionary of English Law, Funk and Wagnalls, back in 1903. Now, what is the United States government with regards to this entity that we call corporations? Okay. The United States government incorporated as a for-profit commercial enterprise in the Legislative Act of February 21st, 1871, 41st Congress, Section 3, Chapter 62, page 419, and chartered as a federal company entitled United States, i.e. United States of America, aka U.S. Incorporated, 1871. A commercial agency originally designated as Washington, D.C., in accordance with the so-called 14th Amendment, which the record indicates was never ratified, and we'll get into that at some point, Supreme Court, and it references Supreme Court cases. Now, let's look at the Corpus Juris Secundum. And this is 19th Corpus Juris Secundum 554. What does this have to say about the United States? The United States government is a foreign corporation with respect to a state. Location of the United States. The United States is located in the District of Columbia, and this is through the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC, Section 9-307. So with reading these three things, what have we determined here? Number one, again, the United States, as you know, the United States government is a for-profit commercial enterprise formed in the Legislative Act of February 21st, 1871. Okay, so basically, folks, from 1789, when the Constitution came into play, until February 21st, 1871, our nation was a federal nation. It was a confederation of states that created this centralizing entity, and it was to be foreign to the states, as the courts have demonstrated. And what they mean by that is this, that the federal government was not to encroach in the business of the states. Okay? The federal government was supposed to be involved in territories, enclaves, and districts only, as in the District of Columbia. Okay? So it's very important that you understand that. Again, we're looking at and discussing two separate and private, for-profit commercial enterprises, corporations. Okay? So what the 14th Amendment, did to us was this. They basically, folks, I'll sum it up this way. The Civil War had nothing to do with freeing the black people. All right? As Lincoln stated, he had no authority to interfere with the practice of slavery. But what they did was they made the abolitionist movement the political cause, if you would, the rallying cry, if you would, of the people, so that the federal states, the federal government could supersede its authority through the use of arms on the sovereign states. It's basically what the Civil War was about. And when you look at what happened after the Civil War with the Lieber Codes, the Reconstructionist Acts, and so forth, you understand that, number one, in the 14th Amendment, they took they took the people, the black people from the private plantation and put everybody on the federal plantation. It's basically what happened, okay? Now, when you look at the 14th Amendment, it says that we are all United States citizens and we enjoy the privileges and civil rights thereof. Is that you in that amendment small or large with regards to united? It is large. Because if the U was small, think of basic English here, guys. If the U was small, as in the original Constitution of the United States, the U was small because it was an adjective describing the action of being united. And then the states was high because that was a noun, person, place, or thing. But after that, after the Civil War, through the Reconstructionist Acts, they changed the name to the United States, the Constitution for the United States of America, and the U was large. Why is that? Again, basic English, because it's now a noun, a person, place, or thing. And what was that thing? It was the corporation. Are you with me? Okay. So then we get enveloped into this corporation through the 14th Amendment. And of course, if you go down the 14th Amendment, I don't have it in front of me verbatim, but you read, I think it's the section 4, where it says, when we are no longer able to have the authority to question the debt. Imagine that. We went from a document of liberty and sovereignty to a document of being placed into a corporation and then not being able to question the debt. Really incredible when you think about that. So now we become attached to this corporation, and the corporation goes along and goes along, and then what happens is another private corporation in 1913 called the Federal Reserve takes over the money system and the credit system of another corporation, the United States of America, the government, USA Incorporated. Okay? So, from there, where are we right now? Okay, the location of the United States is located in the District of Columbia, Uniform Commercial Code, UCC Section 9-307. Okay, that's all fine and dandy. That's where the United States, even if it was incorporated at that point, is supposed to stay and play. Not supposed to be involved in the states. Okay? So, what happens with regards to being citizens of this corporation is rather interesting, because when we find out that this is what goes on with regards to the co-security, okay? In America, a person with a name designated in all capital letters is legally classified as an individual. Sounds good, sounds fine, right? Let's continue. The legal definition of individual is citizen of the United States. 5 U.S.C. subsection 552A. Okay, so what's the law books, what's the courts telling us here? Because it sounds fine and dandy when you start out, right? In America, a person with a name designated in all capital letters is legally classified as an individual. Oh, wow, that sounds pretty good, doesn't it? I'm an individual, I'm my own. No. Remember we talked about the word code, where it comes from Latin, the Latin word coda, to be secretly altered? This is what they do. They play with language, and they bank on our ignorance. See, when they're speaking to us, we think they're speaking common English. Folks, they're speaking a language all of their own, with their own terminology and own definitions. Okay? So what is an individual in law? In commercial law, an individual, the legal definition of individual is citizen of the United States, 5 U.S.C. 552 alpha. Okay. A citizen of the United States must be licensed for almost every daily activity, proven by the appearance of its name exclusively of every type of issue of license. Now think of that. A license, as we've discussed before, becomes from French law and is laissez, which means basically that you are being given permission to do an act which otherwise would be unpermissionable or illegal, okay? So this individual, now what do they mean when they say all capital letters? That's very interesting. But please, take out your driver's license. Everybody has a driver's license. And we'll have to get into the word driver someday, because do you think you need a license to travel? Think about this. So this is all part of the usurpation of knowledge with regards to this new language. It's not new language, but we haven't been exposed to it through the public fool system because they're just another entity of that corporation. Okay? So, but what it's telling us, basically, folks, is that, okay, we, with this uppercase letter legal entity, we are a commercial member, a commercial entity of this corporation, United States of America. All right, and again, you can look it up. This is 5 U.S.C. 552 Alpha. So, with that being said, this corporation goes bankrupt. All right, and we should really, let's look into what is bankruptcy. Okay, and it's really interesting. Bankruptcy. This is Black's Law Dictionary 186. Okay, bankruptcy, the state or condition of one who is bankrupt. Amenability to the bankrupt laws, the condition of one who has committed an act of bankruptcy and is liable to be proceeded against by his creditors, therefore, of one whose circumstances are such that he is entitled on his voluntary application to take the benefit of the bankrupt laws. The term is used in a looser sense as synonymous with insolvency, an inability to pay one's debts, the stopping and breaking up of business because the trader is broken down, insolvent, ruined. It constitutes a branch of equity in jurisprudence in the Reflower Mills of America, D.C., and it gets into some accreditations. Its purpose is to secure the finally to the creditor's distribution of value. Oh boy, what are we getting into here? Its purpose is to secure finally to the creditors its distribution of value. Really interesting when you think about that. Now, what are they saying here in fancy language? What they're saying is the creditors have the court gives the creditors the ability to collateralize any value of the insolvent corporation. Now, when the insolvent corporation, when we went insolvent, and you know, folks, we should get into that a little bit. When we did go insolvent in 1933, basically what took place was that we had the Federal Reserve took over the money. Well, they already had control of the money system, folks, but the federal government was no longer, the corporation federal government was no longer able to pay its promises, its debt to this other corporation. Now, how did the other corporation, what was the service provided from the Federal Reserve Corporation to the United States Corporation that put them in such debt that in such a very short period of time, they were unable to pay off their debts? Well, what service was provided to them was that they gave us permission to print our own money. That was the service provided, folks. They merely gave us permission to print our own money. Of course, it's not our own money if they've given us permission to print it. And they control the issuance of that currency. In other words, the volume, how much, the M3, the money supply. So I want you to think about that. And at that shorter term, we go bankrupt to another the corporation, the United States goes bankrupt to another corporation because they took over our money system deceitfully on December 23rd, 1913, while the Congress was away for the Christmas holiday. And then they charge us an interest because they give us permission to print our own medium of exchange. And we won't call it money because, as we've done before, folks, we understand that money does not incorporate notes of debt. And someone, I think, Jerry, what we'll do is let's get into that a little bit. Like, excuse me, folks, just for a minute. Money. Okay, now this is the definition of money, Black's Law Dictionary, page 1157. And ask yourself here, do we have money? What is our medium of exchange? Okay. Money. In its usual and ordinary acception, it means gold, silver, or paper money used as a circulating medium of exchange and does not embrace notes and bonds in evidence of debt. Let's do that again. Money. In its usual and ordinary acception, it means gold, silver, or paper money used as circulating medium of exchange and does not embrace notes, bonds, or evidence of debt. What are they telling you here, folks? Okay? And they continue with a legal note here from a case, Kennedy versus Breyer, 45, Texas, and there's some other ones, Cook versus State, 130, Arkansas, and so forth. But in its strict technical sense, money means coined metal, usually gold or silver, which upon which the government stamp has been impressed to indicate its value. And in its more popular sense, money means currency or representation of value. Okay? That is incredible. So, do we have money? Ask yourself, folks, do you remember we took out a Federal Reserve note, which you call a dollar? Do you remember when we went over the coinage acts, the founding coinage acts of this nation, and we discovered that a dollar, number one, through the Constitution, is supposed to be in species of gold and silver. And then we researched farther to find out through the coinage acts that a dollar literally is 25.8 grams of gold and a 15-to-1 ratio of silver. Do we have gold and silver backing our money anymore? Because if we did, there would be an instrument called a certificate. Bearer use of, a negotiable instrument, bearer use of. Someone is allowing you to use it, but there is intrinsic value backing that instrument, that medium of exchange. Today, we have an entity called a Federal Reserve note. Federal Reserve, private foreign corporation. Remember we talked about the name being put in deceitfully by Paul Warburg? He used the word federal so that people would think it was part of the federal government. And then he went even farther and used the word reserve because they knew they were going to crash the whole system once they took control of it. And then they were going to confiscate all the intrinsic value of the people, which is the gold and silver. And then they put the name reserve in so the people in the back of their mind would say, oh yeah, okay, it's the federal government, and yeah, for the good of the country, the good of the nation, I'll go ahead and I'll give up all my personal gold and silver for this corporation because, after all, it's Federal Reserve. But then we take the third word of that title, note. And what's a note? We read it verbatim before. A note is an acknowledgement of debt. It is not money. That's what a note is, folks. Okay? A note or a bond or evidences of debt. That's what notes and bonds are. Evidence of debt. That's why there's two signatures on our medium of exchange that you call the dollar, which technically is not money. It is what? It says right on it, folks. It says it in black and white. It's legal tender. Legal tender by decree. The king is telling you, you must use this in the execution of debts, both private and public. So, legal tender, folks, and note, is there any value there? Any intrinsic value? No. So, what happened to our gold and silver when the parent insolvent corporation went insolvent to the solvent corporation, the parent corporation, the Federal Reserve? They confiscated the intrinsic value of the gold and silver. Okay? And you know, when you read the National Banking Holiday Act of 1933, how do you like that, huh? The National Banking Holiday Act. Like it's a big breeze, man. Everything's cool. Don't worry about it. It's a holiday. Take some time off. You got to love their language. Okay? But what they did, folks, was they confiscated the gold and silver, and then they liened the public trust. And the public trust was set up with regards to the lands that were being preserved and so forth. And what happened was it still didn't settle off the debt. Well, folks, think about this. What was the only asset that insolvent corporation had? Think about it. You and I. Our potential labors. Remember, the 14th Amendment made us part of the United States government / corporation. The U is large, person, place, a thing. It's a noun, the thing being a corporation. And basically bonded us through an instrument called the birth certificate. Oh, we're back at this word certificate now. What is that telling us? A negotiable instrument, bearer use of. Someone's allowing you to use an entity, whichever it may be. What is that entity? That entity is the uppercase name they're describing here in this law reference book. That's the nom de guerre. That's the artificial person talked about in the definition of corporation. You represent that nom de guerre. The uppercase print name on your license is a commercial entity. And that's why there are two records, two documents, I should say, when you're born. One is the record of birth. That goes to the health department. That's the flesh and blood, natural, sovereign you. And then there's the birth certificate. That's the bond, the evidence of debt that creates the commercial entity that you represent through contracts with this insolvent corporation, such as your driver's license, your social security number, and other things. Okay? So, folks, believe it or not, you have two split personalities right now. You have two very separate and divided legal entities. Unfortunately, through the conditioning and indoctrination of the public fool system, we all operate pretty much as the corporate entity. You're not a corporation. You're property of an insolvent corporation. Because you may say, well, Tom, I never signed any incorporation papers. That's true. But we're under a commercial law system. Your mother bonded you because you were not old enough to negotiate contract. So your mother, given natural birth to you, has rights of negotiating contract for you until you are old enough to do so on your own. So when you turned 18 years old or 21 years old, did you sever that bond and contract with the foreign bankers that control the operations and credit of the insolvent corporation that you're part of? Did you go to the Office of Vital Statistics and look all this up and say, hey, here's my bond from the Midwest Bank Note Company or the North American Bank Note Company, and I am old enough now to negotiate my own contract, and I am severing the terms of this contract? No, you did not. Why? Because, folks, you probably didn't know about it. Neither did I. So what takes place is they bond us, and what's a bond? Right here, evidence of debt. That's why we work for Federal Reserve notes. What's a note? An acknowledgement of debt. They bond us through the birth certificate, and then they go ahead and issue more credit to this insolvent corporation, the United States of America, the government. And basically, they issue them more credit, give them permission to print more money, and charge them more interest to do all these things. And folks, our whole money system is based on debt. Our whole money system is based on ledger entries. There is nothing else backing up the medium of exchange of our once great nation but your labors through the bonding of the nom de guerre that you represent. I know this is a little complicated, and I know it sounds crazy. Well, folks, I got news for you. It is crazy, okay? It is crazy. But you got to understand, you got to sit back and understand. Well, first of all, folks, take out your driver's license. Go ahead and do that. You know, when the show's over, if you got it handy right now, take it out and look at the uppercase name. All black ink, all uppercase. That's the nom de guerre. When the police officer pulls you over and says, you know, license and registration, folks, don't go yelling at the police because they don't know this, but the judges know this. They are making sure that you're in a commercial venue of law. That's true. They're making sure you're in and that your vehicle is in a commercial venue of law, because now you're in their venue, they can dictate their will to you. The police that pull you over don't know this, folks. They really don't understand it because they're not educated in it. I'll be honest with you, I know a lot of you will disagree with me, but I really believe that if a lot of the law enforcement agencies of this country understood what they were actually enforcing, I think they'd have a change of heart. A lot of them really believe they're out doing well for their people, for their nation. The problem is, folks, when you look at the mission criteria of all the state police agencies, when you get down to what their mission criteria assigned to them, and we read this verbatim on one show before, it was to protect and serve. But to protect and serve what? You continue with the statement. To protect and serve the existing political order. And that's exactly what they're doing. So this insolvent corporation has no more intrinsic value. Its gold and silver is gone. Its physical land and properties have been liened, so they've lost control. As a matter of fact, folks, not to digress too much, but if you go to a lot of our national parks, you'll see UN placards there. It's true. Then you're going to get into researching Agenda 21. Go ahead and punch that in on your computer at some point, and you're going to go, oh boy, look at this. They've already separated my country by zones, population zones, where people are going to live, where they're not going to live. What do you think of the spotted owl out west the whole thing was about? Do you think they give a damn about a spotted owl? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. That was so they could get at the people there to break down the social existence, and people had to leave the area. And they did it without legislation, folks. They did it through agency statutes, the EPA, it's things like this. They didn't do it through the local representatives giving this legislation due diligence and voting on it. No, they did it through some Washington, D.C. agency that has unelected people dictating policy through commercial law called statutes that you have no insight or input on. But at the barrel of a gun, you have to follow it. And this is what they're talking about here. This is exactly what they're talking about. So when in fact the gold and silver was taken, and when in fact the public trust was liened, the only thing they had left, folks, was our labors. And that is where your birth certificate comes into play. Okay? So once the corporation goes bankrupt, there is a thing, and folks, we've got to sort of back up a little bit. The United States and Reorganization Plan number 26, Title 5, U.S. Code, Section 903, Public Law 94-564. And basically, I think we can sum up what happened here with one statement from a congressman named James Traficant Jr., and this is from the Congressional Record, folks. March 17th, 1993, volume 33. Okay, listen to what he says right here. Mr. Speaker, we are now here in Chapter 11. Members of Congress are the official trustees presiding over the greatest reorganization of any bankrupt entity in the world. I am speaking of the United States government. You understand what I'm saying to you? We all know what Chapter 7 and 11s are, and we all know what the reorganization is. Bankruptcy, what we just read directly to you. Okay? And what happens at bankruptcy? The creditors extract the value. Remember, I read that. I just read it verbatim, folks, 10 minutes ago. So your government, the corporation, is insolvent. It is insolvent. It has gone insolvent. Now, let's keep going on with this. So who we went insolvent to? Well, believe it or not, folks, we went insolvent to a private foreign bank, you know, as the Federal Reserve, through another agency called the International Monetary Fund. Okay. Do you remember when we read the Grace Commission verbatim to you? And I'll tell you what, let's see if we can find that real quick. Okay? Now, what the Grace Commission was a study by Ronald Reagan in 1984. And he basically put together this commission because he wanted to, he said, okay, wait a minute, hold on. The United States government is bringing in more, extracting more revenue from the people domestically than at any time in its history. And he wanted to know, number one, where this revenue was coming from in regards to population and proportionment and all this. And he wanted to know also where the money is going. Okay? In other words, a breakdown, if you would, of the budget. Now, here's what the Grace Commission report to the President Reagan, January 15th, 1984. Are you ready for this? 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by interest on the federal debt and by federal government transfers of payments. In other words, all individual income tax revenues are gone before one nickel is spent on the services which taxpayers expect from their government. Isn't that interesting? 100% of what is collected is absorbed solely by the interest on the federal debt and by federal government agencies to transfer payments. In other words, all individual income tax revenues are gone before one nickel is spent on the services which taxpayers expect from their government. So you think your income taxes are going to, let's say, the roads, the bridges. You think your income taxes are going to the military. No, they're not, folks. They're going to these very same bank, in the solvent corporation, because they usurped the issuance power of our country through the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, charged us so much interest to give us permission to print our own medium of exchange that now we can't pay this debt. And so they automatically, before you even, with no court order, with no really say on your part, you know, if you want a job, supposedly here's what you got to do. Land of the free? Really? Exactly where does the word freedom come into that? Because I don't see it. So you have a subservient foreign corporation every day extracting the value of the labors of a nation, you and I, because they usurped the power that was delegated to the de jure Congress of the United States. And they have, losing that power, we are completely bankrupt. We are literally slaves to a superior foreign corporation. Folks, it's perpetual debt, because for every, I'm just going to call them dollars because that's what you recognize them as. For every dollar you have in your pocket, there is an interest due on it, because they gave us permission to print it through merely making an entry on a ledger. So how do you get out of debt to pay the interest on the original one? Because if you print more of them dollars to pay the interest on the original debt, you're in greater debt because you had to print more of this useless medium of exchange. And then also, how about how we control that? How do we control the booms and the busts, the inflation and deflation? It's very simple, folks. You control the M3. You control the physical money supply of society. Very, very simple. Because the more money I print, the more medium of exchange, the more notes I print, the less value each one has because there's more of them. The more I take away and restrict the volume of money, the higher value it has. So what is inflation? You know, we hear about inflation. Oh, the loaf of a bread went up. Well, you're looking at it wrong. The price of that loaf of bread didn't change in the sense that it's still X amount of wheat, X amount of flour, X amount of the ingredients, emulsifiers and so forth that are in the bread, the yeast and so forth. What's changed is that the medium of exchange, the currency, has lost purchasing power. It has lost value. So it takes more of these worthless pieces of paper to buy that same loaf of bread. That is inflation. Inflation is not caused by making the bread. Inflation is caused by the devaluation of the medium of exchange that you use to purchase the bread. I use the example of my mother buying a house in 1964 for $14,000. And that house 3 years ago was worth $300,000 with no improvements. I mean, regular maintenance, but no improvements. Did the cost of the house change? Did the house change? No. The house didn't change a bit. What changed was the value of the medium of exchange. That's what changed, because it was devalued. It took more of the same pieces of paper to buy the same house. When I was a child, they had penny candies. And penny candies are a nickel or a dime or a quarter now. Why? Because that penny did not hold the same value. And that's why the forefathers, understanding history, understanding the downfalls of many of a nation and empires, they all fell from two things. One from within, but the linchpin has always been the currency, the medium of exchange. When we had a foundation, when you had intrinsic value that couldn't be altered, couldn't create busts and booms, you had growth. And that's what made the country that we live in at one point the most prosperous nation in the world. And at one time, folks, the federal government only collected taxes through tariffs, through foreigners bringing products and or businesses into the geographical United States. They were tariffs. But because the United States government was so small, don't forget, the United States government is regulated to judicial, defense, and treasury only, because they didn't have this incredible, gigantic, mammoth budget, they were able to operate on just tariffs and still have a surplus. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine that? There was, at one point, folks, the federal government did not have any domestic taxes on its people within the United States? Oh, let me count the ways, huh? How many we have now? At what percentage of your labors is this extracted from? But again, don't forget, the IRS, as we've proven, the Federal Reserve, as we've proven, the IMF, as we've proven, is not a federal agency. It is private foreign agencies. Okay. So now we're into the bankruptcy. We understand the superior and inferior positions of the two or three corporations that affect us on a daily basis. So what happens here? Basically what goes on is that, folks, the artificial person again, and I want to read, this is a Black Seventh. Again, the artificial person, the nom de guerre, the upper name all black case entity that you represent. An artificial person, an entity such as a corporation created by law and given certain legal rights and duties. As a human being, a being real or imaginary, who for the purpose of legal reasoning is treated more or less as a human being. Well, isn't that interesting, huh? Isn't that interesting? That you're treated more or less as a human being, whether it's real or imaginary. Well, folks, it is imaginary. It's part of a corporation. It's artificial, okay? So, what we need to do is basically, as we go on here, and folks, I think I want to stop here with the technical stuff because I just want to speak to you about what we've gone through here. Number one, we understand that there are two of us in law. There is a corporate entity, the nom de guerre. There is the natural born red blood celled. I don't want to use the word person because we demonstrated person is actually an unofficial corporation, but we are basically two separate legal entities, and one is attached to an insolvent corporation, and the other is supposed to be free and sovereign, okay, answering to none, to live by his own dictates, and to not have the law involved in his life unless he interferes with the life, happiness, or property of another. I think we can say we all dream about living the sovereign, but we don't. And we don't because we've been deceived through contracts. You know, no one told you when you filled out paperwork with the IRS that you were voluntarily requesting to put yourself under the IRS code, and you were requesting, desiring to have money taken out of your pay so it can go to a solvent foreign corporation that usurpably took over the issuing powers of our corporate government in 1913. And because they merely give us permission to print our own money, you know, your labors now go to these people. And as the Grace Commission demonstrated to you, not one penny of your income tax goes to the operations of the government. You know, folks, and then you may say, oh, well, how is it that, you know, Tom, we have highways. We have the Eisenhower highway system. Well, folks, you buy a gallon of gasoline, you buy a tire, you buy a quart of oil. There are road usage taxes attached to that quart of oil, a gallon of gasoline. That's how we pay for the roads. It's the same thing with the military, folks. If you look at our military budgets prior to about 3 years ago, they usually matched the corporate revenue taxes, because basically they took the corporate money and put it into the Defense Department. Of course, now we are spending more. They are spending more. That corporation, you know, the United States government, is spending more than it's taking in, putting us deeper and deeper and deeper into debt to the solvent corporation that we call the Federal Reserve. So where are we as a nation, folks? And I want you to think about this because I read a very interesting memo. It was an internal memo, and I'm not at liberty to give names, and I will honor that because I said I wouldn't. But I read a very interesting memo about the consequence of the Federal Reserve no longer issuing credit to the insolvent corporation, you know, there's the United States government. And some of the things in the memo led me to believe that this is going to be coming right down the pike. And I'm not speculating here. It was just a thought that I had after reading this memo. And it basically made me think of this. Do you remember about 6 months ago, we read a memo from you from Bank of America and other certain banking, major league banking interests that said that they were going to, if you cashed a paycheck, you were only going to be allowed to take a certain percentage in cash, and you'd have to wait 4 to 7 business days to retract the cash. So in other words, if I put a paycheck into the bank, and I'm not going to be able to get cash right then, I have to come back 4 to 7 days to get it. Well, I want you to think about what would happen, folks, with the dependency percentage of people who are dependent on welfare and SSI and Medicaid if the parent superior corporation, Federal Reserve, quit issuing credit to the insolvent inferior corporation, the United States government. What would happen? Folks, when the electricity goes off in the cities, look what happens. Can you imagine if they stop the subsidies? You'll have anarchy. You'd have complete anarchy. Every city in this country would explode. Explode. You know, I read a study one time on the demographics of money in this country with regards to, you know, who's paying into the system, who's extracting from the system, the waste, the unaccountable money, all this stuff. And you know one thing that was amazing to me? And they broke it down by race, they broke it down by economic demographics, they broke it down by educational class, all of this. But you know what was really amazing to me out of this whole study? Was that the middle class, if you would, which is being squeezed from the bottom and above, by far paid the highest percentage of taxes into this monster. And when you look at the people who have been on generations of welfare now, 1964, the welfare system started. Trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars at interest due to the Federal Reserve given to these people. Housing, food, everything, given to them. Folks, it means nothing to them because they haven't had to work. They don't mind putting holes in the walls. You know why? Because someone's going to come and fix it, and it's not going to cost them a dime. It's not going to cost them any aggravation at all, so they have no respect for what they have. And a lot of times, when you have generations and generations of welfare, folks, it becomes a way of life. And all you have to do is be young, go out and get pregnant. But don't have the father in that household, because then we're not going to supplement you. See, we want to destroy the family structure of the country. So, folks, understand what we've said to you today. You are an attachment. You are property of an insolvent corporation. You have been bonded through your birth certificate. You judge your life by an instrument of debt. And you also get all your information from a mainstream media and a public fool system, which is controlled by these very same masters of our money system. And folks, this is why this nation is where we're at. This is why we have these wars of imperial wars going on now. Because we're like the boxing champ who everyone is picked up on his tricks and everyone is picked up on his moves. And everyone now can counter his moves because he's been exposed. And we're on the ropes. And we're on the ropes hard, and our knees are shaking. Okay? So, folks, I want, when you leave with this show today, think of this, how you are a corporate possession of an insolvent corporation. And I want to leave you with that thought, though. Think about what would happen in every city in this country if the welfare checks cease and the Federal Reserve decides you are no longer credit worthy, that we are no longer going to issue you permission to print your own money. With that being said, folks, as always, we are very, very thankful that you take time from your busy day to join us. And as we always do, we leave reminding you that your government is your responsibility. Thank you for watching.